The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
To Triversity Talk. I'm Wendy Stuart, and I am so happy to have you with me here this evening. It's Wednesday night. You could be doing anything. You could be at a holiday party, but if you're watching this, you are here with me. It's been an especially important week. Monumental Respect for Marriage Act signed by President Biden this week, recognizing marriage equality in federal law. We're all very thrilled about that. This is certainly the time of year where we want positivity happening. There's so much philanthropy going on in our community. Personally, this week, I was involved with the Imperial Court of New York doing a wonderful show, The 12 Drags of Christmas. And we do that show every year. And members of the Imperial Court of New York, which is the largest LGBTQ philanthropic organization in the country, we perform. And that's how we raise money. And the money this last week was being raised for the incident that happened in Colorado Springs. Things tend to disappear from the news. You hear about them. They used to last 2 weeks. Now I say, they last 2 to 5 days, and then you don't hear anything anymore. But the people, and I hate using this word, but it's exactly what happened. The victims of an attack, a terrorist attack, some of them are still recovering. So our hearts go out to them. And the Imperial Court of New York really was able to raise money and make a difference in the world, which is, what it is all about. So talking about difference in the world, very excited about the guest that I have coming on tonight. He is, first of all, an award-winning New York Times author and journalist, and he's known for promoting cross-cultural understanding in his literacy work. And he's also the founder and host for this amazing festival we have coming up. It's called The Road to Freedom. It's going to be held in New York. It's a literacy festival. I can't think of a better way to raise money for an organization called the Rainbow Railroad. For those of you who don't know what Rainbow Railroad is, they are based out of Canada, and they look to stop LGBTQ plus individuals from being persecuted and being victims of violence all around the world. And that is certainly something that we're very much aware of is going on. So having this festival will really be everything to certainly make people aware of the situation. So without further ado, our author and journalist, Richard Morais, welcome.
Thank you, Wendy.
And there you are.
Thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you, and I'm always so happy when streaming works because, well, we all know the kinds of things that can happen, right? And
Correct.
It's cold in the Northeast now. We're having blizzards in other places. So you and I are very blessed that we've got just a very cold night, but no weather tonight.
Correct.
Which is absolutely perfect. So in your introduction, I talked about you promoting your cross-cultural understanding. And in my reading of who you are as an author, your books actually are very much themed around that. So I'd like to start with the books that are most well known. You've done so much writing. Your first one is that I'd like to talk about is The Man with No Borders. Can you fill us in a little bit about that
Yeah,
story?
so that's the last book. So the first book was The 100-Foot Journey, which was about a Muslim Indian family who
Right.
moves to France and sets up a restaurant. And that's the book that I'm actually best known for. That was a global bestseller. And then Spielberg and Oprah made a film of
Right.
that with Helen Mirren. And it's a lovely, charming film. But that was the first book. And that's actually for the book I'm best known for. And then my second book is called Bulan Brooklyn, and that's
Yes.
about a repressed Japanese Buddhist priest, and he has a trauma from his past that he's hiding. He's hiding in a monastery, and he hits 40, and his superior decides to shake things up, and he sends him to Brooklyn, New York, to open up their first Buddhist temple in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn.
I'm loving this already. I mean, you've got look at the
And-
culture stuff going on.
and it's all about these eccentric New Yorkers, how they change this sort of uptight, repressed. And he's a misanthrope and a misogynist and a homophobe. And the reason is and he wants to keep his distance from people, and that's because he suffered this great trauma. And it's the people of New York, these eccentric characters in New York, who loosen him up.
Of course.
And he teaches them something about, spiritual, counters some of their material pursuits. And then the last book, the one that you talked about, The Man with No Borders, that's about a Spanish private banker who's dying in Switzerland. He has an American wife, and he has to come to terms with his sins before he can die. And the middle one, Bulan Brooklyn, is in development as a premium television series, and the last one we're developing as a feature film.
So I love, first of all, that you turned your whole background into being able to write these novels with such really fascinating characters and all the people that are around them as well. How has being a journalist affected the creating of these books? I mean, you didn't start out writing novels. You obviously wrote real news, right? So tell me what the crossover point was.
Well, so I always wanted to make a living, but I had a family and I had to pay bills. And so I started.
Thank you for being so sensible. I'm thanking them.
So I went to work for Forbes magazine, and I was their longest serving foreign correspondent. And we were stationed in London for 18 years. I was the Forbes' European bureau chief. And I really started, I always wanted, but when my daughter was born, the day she was born, I started writing fiction again. And I said, life is short. And so I always, time is precious. And I have something more to say that the journalism wasn't addressing. And so I always, and I love doing both. And the reason is that the journalism kind of gets me out into the world, and I meet fascinating people and I go fascinating places. And that becomes the lifeblood of my fiction. So I get my ideas and color from being forced, writers, I'll just stay in my room and just, like a mushroom, just do my thing in a closet. But, journalism forces me out into the world. So it actually is, very enriching for my fiction. And conversely, fiction, and I also learned a lot about research through journalism. And then conversely, my fiction taught me to be a better writer as a journalist. So they actually worked out.
Oh, you know what? Talking to you, because I knew you were a writer, but while we're having this conversation, I can completely see how they not only work together, but being a person that writes novels, that's a whole different level of communication. Correct. Than being a journalist. It's funny because you've asked me who my audience is on this show. And as I told you, it's who's ever listening. But in your case, you would have you would have overlap, but you'd also have two very different audiences. The person that would pick up one of your fascinating novels would not necessarily be the same person that's going to tune into something that's being written about in Forbes.
Right. Well, I mean, that's just the way I'm wired. I have to do that. I can't contain multitudes, and honestly, in the business world, if you have one thing and you do it well, you hammer that, and that's how you make a fortune. I could not do that. I always had to challenge myself as an artist and a writer and keep on moving on to something new. And so, it's both a curse and a blessing.
No, it's definitely a blessing, and you definitely are a good example of that left brain, right brain thing that people talk about. Now, you grew up, I'm assuming, exposed to a lot of cultural things.
Well, I was born in Portugal, so my parents were expats. My mom's from a sort of Wasp, New York, and my father was a Canadian of Portuguese descent. My grandfather was the Portuguese consul general in Newfoundland. And so my dad growing up, became a Canadian. And he worked for a Canadian aluminum company called Alcan. And in the 50s, they were
I know Alcan.
Yeah. So in the 50s, they were sent to, my dad spoke 7 languages, and Alcan sent them to Portugal and Spain, which were emerging markets then, to build their operations there. And so my brothers and I'm the youngest of 4 brothers. We're all born in Portugal and Spain. And then when I was 10, I was the youngest. And when I was 10 months old, we moved to Switzerland. So I grew up in Switzerland. I went to British and American schools in Switzerland. But my mother had always brought us up to be, like Americans. And, she ached. She was like so homesick for New York the entire
time you were living.
Exactly. She was just like, get me the hell out of Switzerland. I want to go back to New York. So anyway, I grew up with this. And in fact, my mother, we were totally dysfunctional in my family. And
Richard, everyone's family is
well, that is true. That is true. But all in our own unique way.
Right.
And so she kind of saved our family by going into analysis herself. And she became a Jungian analyst in Zurich, in Switzerland, at the Jung Institute in Zurich. And she wrote her thesis on homesickness, on the archetype of homesickness.
Oh my gosh.
And this ache. And her thesis, which I still have, it's about this ache to get back to this place, this sort of idyllic place where everything was just magic. And
New York City was such magic.
Exactly. And it doesn't exist. It's like a mythic place. And so she made the point that Spielberg's E.T., Phone Home, it's about why that was $1 billion global success. Is because we all tapped it. It was hitting an archetype, a collective story of our ache to get home, somehow make our way. That our entire adult life, we're just searching how to get home, how to make it back home. And so I inherited this. And so at the age of 16, I went to Sarah Lawrence College.
Went to Sarah Lawrence, yeah.
And I get in thinking I was American. And of course, as soon as I got here, I said, I'd only been to America like 2 times, even though I considered myself American.
And had you even been to New York?
I had been to New York, but in those days, it was like, home leave was every 4 years. So I went when I was like 4 and 8 or 8 and 12. I don't remember the 4 very much. And so when I got here, I was at 16. I went to Sarah Lawrence, and the first thing I do is I see a guy in a tutu, and I said, "You're not in Zurich anymore."
You're not in Zurich anymore, right?
So here I was at 16, and I realized I'm not really American. I'm not really European. And I started going kind of crazy because it's to be 16, 17 or 18 anywhere in the world where you're trying to figure out who you are. It's horrible. It's a horrible time in life. It's very
right. But you were at that point really without a country. Because
exactly. So to not even know what country you belong to was just, I was tripping. I was just really on the edge. And I remember going to, there was a great teacher at Sarah, a writing teacher, Grace Paley, and she was kind of a writer's writer. She only wrote short stories, but she was exquisite. And everyone knew, she was a huge figure in the literary circles. And she came into class, and all her stories were about the Jewish Bronx. And she came in and she said, the reason we write is to show how we're different from other people. Right. And I heard this, and I was like 17, and I put my hand up and I said, Grace, I have to tell you, I think that is the most irresponsible remark I have ever heard a teacher say. I said, I know why I'm different from other people. I feel it every moment of the
Yeah.
day. The reason I'm writing is to try and find what I have in common with other people.
You're looking for a common point of connection.
Exactly, exactly. And if I get my writing deep enough, then I'm talking about the human condition, which cuts through all the cultural, all the baggage, all the stuff that gets the noise, and we're getting to the deepest part of the human
I
experience.
call that the meat and potatoes of the nitty gritty.
Exactly, exactly. So this is kind of a circuitous way to answer your original question. So then all of my books, I kind of picked up on my mother's story about homesickness. And so all of my books are, I think there are like two kinds of people in the world, that some of them need to be attached to the soil of their ancestors. So like Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, she's, she's a nutcase. She's an absolute flake. But remember, her father always says, you've got to be attached to the soil of Tara.
Right.
And she, when it comes to saving Tara, she will plant rutabaga with her hands, just
Absolutely.
because that's what grounds her. And so certain people need to be attached to the soil of their ancestors, and that allows them to process the enormous events of life. And if you tear them from that soil, like we're seeing in the poor Ukrainians being chased, or LGBTQ that the Rainbow Railroad is helping, taking them out of their home countries because their lives are being threatened, then they can become unstable, and it takes several generations to work themselves through that trauma. To work that trauma through.
They do work through the trauma, because if you think of friends that I had growing up, their parents had concentration camp numbers on them still. Right? The parents pass that on to the kids. All right. And I even have a friend in Milford, Pennsylvania. Right. Her mother she's an amazing woman, Holocaust survivor, but that gets passed down. I don't know.
I want to later share with you this Holocaust story I have. This is amazing about that. But I just wanted to finish. That the other thing is that I also think there are certain people on Earth who have to leave their village, have to leave their soil, and they have to go out into the world to become complete human beings.
Absolutely.
And that if you force them to stay at home in their village, they would become unstable. And sometimes in places like Milford and small towns around America, you see them stumbling from the bars at midnight. And sometimes the military is a way for these people who have this calling that's greater, and they don't know how to get out, and the military is a way for them to get out into the world. But in any event, all my books are two things. It's about one person going from one culture to another. And you can honestly experience this from going from Akron, Ohio to LA, to a job in LA.
It is right in our own country.
You have to go from Zurich to New York.
Yeah.
And then you can also so it's all about people who have to go out in the world to become, and they go from one place to another, and this search for home. Where is home? If you do that, then you have to kind of you have to create your own home.
So I have a question for you. Are you home yet?
I am. So it's kind of interestingly, I am. Milford, even though I was born and raised in Europe, I'm the fourth generation. Milford, Pennsylvania, where we live, is actually, I'm the fourth generation of my family that's had a home here. And so outwardly, it's funny, I have a brother in San Francisco, and he's outwardly much more American than I am. But he is absolutely so attached to our Portuguese heritage. And he's done so much for the Portuguese community.
He's completely connected.
He was just knighted by Portugal for his work for him. And conversely, I'm much more outwardly European, but I'm very, very grounded to the American side of our family. So and also doing this for the Rainbow Railroad is also, this is my home. And this is making me feel like I'm complete and I'm doing something of service. I think that anytime we are doing something of service to the world, we are at home. And that's in the Upanishads, I can't recall the line off, but it said that when you strive to make the world better, then you have found your home.
And that is extremely well put. Well, you must be very excited about doing the work that you're doing for the Rainbow Railroad, I would think, can you talk a little bit and share with people about the railroad?
Yeah, so like the Underground Railroad of lore in America,
Yeah.
which, as you know, it was a route from the south north, and safe farms, abolitionist farms on the way, that slaves that escaped and were trying to make their way to freedom could go to these farms safely.
Well, they would be safe.
Hidden and fed, and then they would go to the next farm. It was called the Underground Railroad. And we live in Pennsylvania, and the Quakers were very big in this.
Yeah, they were, absolutely.
So the Rainbow Railroad is doing the same thing for the LGBTQ plus community. So basically, there are 69 United Nations countries where it's criminal to have same-sex attraction and intimacy,
or be a different perception of gender. It's also got to do with
and I'm talking. That's what I'm talking about. In its entire, the rainbow version of this, its entire, any way that manifests the other, the so-called the other, and in 11 of them, the sentence is death. And most people are shocked when they hear this.
Well, it's a horrible death too, by stoning, hanging, and just awful.
And torture. There's usually a lot of torture that goes in before they're killed. And so the Rainbow Railroad kind of goes underground. And I highly encourage, if you want to know what the Rainbow Railroad does, there's this fantastic documentary on HBO called Welcome to Chechnya. And it's about, have you seen it?
I have.
Yeah, so that's the Rainbow Railroad. If you look at the end, they're the ones who are thanked, because they're all kind of getting to Canada, which is because Rainbow Railroad is helping them get to Canada and that.
Well, and also I know about the Rainbow Railroad from dealing with Kakuma 13, Block Kakuma 13, which is in Kenya, and what has happened to those people there in that camp. And I'll go into that later, but what they also do is they can't get everybody out. There's so many people. They can't get everybody out. So they do at least give some kind of support, right? They partner with local organizations. That's tremendous for people that they can't get out. You can't get everything.
Well, I'm getting, because of my role with creating this literary festival for the Rainbow Railroad, I'm getting texts from Ugandans who are in Kenya. Escaping being killed in Uganda, getting into camps, and they're having a horrific time in Kenya, and they're begging me for help. And it's just so, this. I said, look, all I can do is what I'm doing is try and raise money for the Rainbow Railroad. And you got to go through them,
right? And I learned that too. But we did do a fundraiser for them at the Stonewall.
That was wonderful.
And what we did, Chauncey Dandridge, who's an amazing activist and who works at the Stonewall, he brought them in on a live stream on a monitor. All right. And the brilliant thing that he did, because there's too much of us thinking it's over there. We don't, they're a different culture. There's your cross culture, but they're a different culture. There's nobody we could connect to. He puts them up on the monitor. People introduce themselves, and each one, they were young, had a sign of who they wanted to be. And they spoke, I want to be a doctor. I want to be an engineer. Okay. I want to be a professor. It was all the same wants that you or I or anyone else. Exactly. And that was such a big connecting point. We need to realize what's going on in the world right now. These people are exactly like us, and it's really awful the way they're being persecuted.
It's brutal. And that's where, when the theme of the Road to Freedom Literary Festival / fundraiser, which, by the way, is happening January 12th in New York City. We've had Vernado Realty Trust very generously. They're the biggest developers in New York. They're redeveloping Penn Station, and they've given us this incredible theater and space and lounge with fire. It's just an amazing space in Pen 1. And the theme of the festival, and I hope I can talk a little bit about the incredible talent who's coming. So the theme of it is storytelling heals the wounds of the soul.
Yeah.
And so, as a writer, we work through our problems in life. I work through my problems in life through writing. And so storytelling through time immemorial, mankind has told stories to process the pains and vicissitudes of life. Right. So that's the theme. And so we're selling tickets, we have donors, and it's going to be a really remarkable evening of storytelling. And I've got incredible 5 writers that are just extraordinary. So we have Chen Chen, who is this Chinese American poet.
Oh, yeah.
He's got this poem about the narrator is 13 and tells his Chinese parents in Amherst, Massachusetts, that he's gay. And his mother slaps him, and he spends the night in the tree. It is an incredible poem. It will have you weeping at the end.
Wow.
And we have Tori Peters, who Tori is a trans woman, and she has written this great book called Deep Transition Baby, and it won the Penn Faulkner Award for last year for best debut novel, and it is both hilarious and gut-wrenching.
Oh, yeah,
and great literature forces you to think differently about the world. And with my sort of white privilege background, this book really was like a piece of pumice that made me question my own worldview. And that's the sign of great literature. But at the same time, it's highly entertaining. It is. Right. It's a page-turning and rip-roaring fun. Then we have Peter Staley, who a lot of people don't need it. He's one of the, leading activists during the HIV/AIDS battles. And he was kind of for a long time one of the main spokesmen for ACT UP. And he wrote this very touching autobiography called Never Silent. And he talks interestingly about, during that fight for life that was going on with those, for that generation of HIV infected.
I was a very big part of that.
I remember that. I know that.
Right.
So I hope you're going to be there on January 12th. I want to introduce you to Peter. Okay, all right. I want to introduce you to Peter. So Peter, but then he talks very movingly. I was so touched by his autobiography because he talks about it was the worst of times, but also oddly the best of times, in the sense that they were fighting for life. They were fighting, right. and everything had meaning. Everything had meaning. And that when the need, because the new antiretroviral drugs came along and Combivir came out, he went through a real crash, and with drugs and alcohol. And it's a very, very brave, really incredibly brave,
very, very soul
right
revealing type of.
And also, since I'm late to the party, I didn't know. I mean, I knew about it from a long lens of reading the New York Times.
Yeah, but you weren't in the belly of the beast.
Right. So I've been playing catch up, reading Sean Struve's, book.
Right, and I knew Sean back in the 80s. Okay,
yeah, right.
And because we were both knew a lot of the same people.
Well, I know that you were doing God's work by going around and feeding a lot of people who couldn't get out.
We were actually taking care of the pets of anyone that had HIV.
That's right.
It was called Powers. Right. But one of the perks to Powers was I met a number of doctors, and they were the doctors that were working on what I call the Dallas Buyer Club drugs. They were not FDA approved. They were off label. But everyone we knew was dying from AZT. Right. So there were these other drugs you could take
All right.
And I have to tell you something. There were 3 doctors. One of them was Joseph Sonnabend, who Sean Stroop knows.
Right.
I knew Joseph. Those people are alive. They're alive.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, which it's amazing.
Yeah, Sean talks very moving about that. So Peter has a fascinating, when they made the Dallas Buyers Club film, he's got a fascinating story about, it was about to go completely off the rails. They had this denialist in the middle of it who was making the film. The director didn't. He's got a great story about that, about fighting to correct that, which he was able to influence the outcome of that. But anyway, and so then we have the fantastic Richie Hoffman. He is one of my favorite poets. He's a Stanford University professor, and he's steeped in sort of Greek. He's very well read and educated, and he's steeped in Greek and Latin mythology, but his poems they just leave you poets, they can see in a dust mote the entire universe.
Well, I love the way you put that. That was very poetic.
So that's what Richie does. I mean, but it's always with a guy in a room, and it's just the way that the curtains are. This is such exquisite poetry, and he's such an exquisite poet. And then we have the fantastic Nicole Dennis Benn. So Nicole is from Jamaica. She's got 2 bestsellers. She's super hot. So her latest novel just was at Frankfurt Fair, and there was 8 publishers bidding for it. She is going to be the next literary. I mean, she already is she's already a bestseller, but I mean, in the next category, super literary star. So we have this real mix.
Jamaica is very anti-gay.
And so Kamali Powell, who is running the Rainbow Railroad, and in fact, I was just reading. There was a man they just saved from Jamaica, who, despite how dangerous it was, he was fighting for HIV positive rights, and and patients, fighting the rights for AIDS patients, and he was got so dangerous that they had to extract him from Jamaica, and he's now in France, and they're placing, and he's studying to become a nurse in France. But he was someone who was a hero in Jamaica.
They got him to France, thank God.
Yeah, so this is what the Rainbow Railroad do. Right now, for example, in Russia, there's an explosion of applications. And the reason
this came out and said in Russia. I mean, it's not safe. It's not safe in Russia for them.
No, so particularly trans are just so at risk right now.
Yeah.
And they just got Rainbow Railroad just got a group of Russians to Latin America to relocate to Latin America. That's what they do. They get them out of harm's way. They have safe houses. You have, if you see that in Welcome to Chechnya. In fact, that was the Chechnya story was there was the Russians were at war in Chechnya. Putin installed a strong man who was in his favor, and he basically said, if you kiss my ring, you can run Chechnya the way you want. And the guy has been torturing and killing anyone
who's
that isn't heteronormative.
Yeah.
And so they had a safe house in Russia, and the Welcome to Chechnya is about how they get them there. You've got to see this. It's absolutely, you cannot believe what they go through. I mean, they put in fake identities. One of them was a woman, and she, it was a lesbian, and her father was a major figure in the government. And you should see what there's such attention to detail that they get. But in that movie, they say, if this happens in Chechnya, it could happen here in Russia. And of course.
Oh, of course. Absolutely.
3 years later, that's exactly what's going to happen.
It happens in Iran or any of the Middle Eastern countries. Right.
So the reason I started this literary festival, it was not just to tell a bunch of nice stories, but the Rainbow Railroad is doing incredibly important work. They are saving lives. There are people who are being they have PTSD from the torture that they've been through. And they're helping them recover mentally, physically, gets them to safe houses, then to new countries to start their lives again.
They also have to get them set up in the country.
Exactly. I mean, it's a huge operation, and
no easy. That's
right.
no.
And it's so dangerous working in these. It is, it's like they often have to put in identities and getting them and cover stories to get them out. I mean, it's really, really intense work.
Right. It's
and but they right now, so last year they had about 8,000 requests for help. This year they have 10,000. Their finances are such is that they have to date helped since they founded in 2006, helped 5,000 people. So I heard this.
They were formed in 2006.
Since they were formed in 2006, and 5,000 plus, they have managed to get out of these, out of harm's way to safe countries. But they're getting 10,000 a year requests.
Exactly,
and they're turning away. So I said, this is and this Rainbow Railroad scores 92 out of 100 on Charity Navigator. This is a wonderful organization. Kamali Powell runs. I mean, it's just a really good, highly dedicated people, and not a lot of waste. And I said, I have to do something. And this is, I work, as a business journalist. This is what private equity do. They invest. They see really good companies and they invest in them so that they can expand their capacity. So this is my version of doing that. I created this literary festival and fundraiser, which you all are invited to. I want all to see. And if you do come, you need to come up to me and say, hi, I saw you on Triversity Talk, and I will shake your hand. And thank you.
So in terms of your outreach, okay, because we know with these numbers, and by the way, if you go to their website, one of the first things you see on it is a red button to push. Do you need help? Right. That's the first thing, because anyone that goes on there, which that's completely impressive.
It's completely geared to the person looking for help.
Exactly. Right. So with that being said, and what is going on in the world right now more than ever, and all of these requests and your background, how are you going? What is the plan to bring in big business and Wall Street?
Well, they are helping. So part of this is to raise cash for the media, but it's also a networking opportunity. And so for example, I'm getting executives from UBS to come, and they said, look, we didn't have enough in our budget this year, but we're interested. So I'm just getting them to come to meet the Rainbow Railroad. So it's also about leveraging contacts and relationships.
Absolutely.
But we have Vornado, the biggest developer in New York, giving. There is also some very generous individuals who I don't want to name right now.
No, it's cool.
But they just, and these are like professional. These are seriously wealthy people who are professional philanthropists. They know how to kick they can spot the fakes from the real thing, and so they're also going to be there and coming, and but we also wanted so the tickets are $150. But that includes food and drink and this incredible night of entertainment.
Right.
So, and for New York, a dinner in New York, how much a dinner in New York is. It's not a bad deal.
Oh,
but the
deal is great. But the thing that really got to me was I know about a lot of organizations. And until I spoke to you like a few months back, you started telling me about the Rainbow Railroad. I hadn't heard of them. And that's the thing, getting the word out. And I don't have to tell you that. That's the hardest thing, but that's the thing that has to happen. Because you're right. There's people, and internationally, there's people with money that support the LGBTQ community all over the world now that can change things just by the kinds of donations and who they would have Rainbow Railroad partner with. So it's getting the word out.
It is getting the word out. So one of the joys of this is I'm doing this with my daughter, and so
By the way, I love that you had told me that. I think
yeah.
that's
So she got Sutton Communications. She does a very high level art and museum public relations, but she got Sutton Communications, her company, to pro bono. The first pro bono was to do this, and so we just had a nice piece in Time Out.
right.
Our mutual friends, Mark Isom, is getting The Advocate. He's the publisher of the. So he's part of the group that owns The Advocate, and a lot of the.
Yeah, he just started up there. That's perfect. But that's perfect. You're
Pride,
already
Pride.
network.
Right. So he very generously is helping us get the word out through all of their publications. So this is all about it's about who do you know to help and how can you help, and you just do what you can. I'm a lowly scribbler, but because of my journalism, I know a lot of Wall Street types. So I'm working on them. So I'm getting a lot of them to come up. And anyway, a lot of those uptown bankers need to meet some downtown people. So that's part of my job. So is to get some downtown, and conversely, some downtown artists need to meet some uptown bankers. So
that's what I do in my world.
It's like a good party is always you want to have like an actress next to a banker, next to a sculptor, next to a philosopher. You want to mix things up, and so
I call it a people potpourri.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's what you want to do. Is this your first time being so committed and trying to raise money for something that you believe in?
This is different.
You're very passionate.
I came up with this idea, and I should also have to give a shout out for our mutual friend Karen Haycox, who's also from our village.
Who's coming
and Karen, and I think she's been on your show. So Karen, yeah. So Karen, she's the CEO of Habitat for Humanity in the New York area. She's also on the board of Rainbow Railroad. So I heard about it from her, and I said, I got to do this. And I thought, what can I do? And I said, well, Richard, you're connected in the literary world. You're also connecting. Why don't you? So I have a friend at UBS who's the global chief investment officer in Zurich for UBS, and he has a theory. He calls it the Reese's chocolate cup, Reese's cup theory, and that is take two things that aren't normally associated with each other, chocolate and peanut butter, and put them together, and you have something completely new. But because each was, liked in itself, the risks of putting them together aren't that much, and you get a completely different thing. And I thought, ooh, that's kind of interesting. This is my attempt. So this is like, LGBTQ activism and politics, and because there's a lot of politics, as you can imagine, that the Rainbow Railroad has to do.
There's a lot of politics
and downtown writers and bankers, and so it's really
impressed, Richard. This is really your first big shot out of the bag in this area. I'm from the ACT UP days, and I'm very impressed that you had this connection, first of all, with Karen. It shows, right? You're talking about networking. This happened right here in Milford. You would have had to have, you met her and you were talking, and something about that spoke to you.
And then you heard, and then I spoke to you and you picked it up, and that's how it happens. That's how it happens. Yeah. That's how magic happens. And it's the passion and infection. But honestly, anyone who reads about the Rainbow Railroad says, this is an amazing organization. And, it gets down to that fact. There are 11 countries in the world where they're going to kill you if you have, if you believe same-sex intimacy or on the spectrum, LGBTQ plus spectrum, wherever you are.
I really feel it's not just 11 countries. Okay, there's 11 countries that we know of where they.
Right. I was going to say there's 70 countries where it is, criminal. And also, I have to say a personal story. So, a part of this is we were talking about earlier about family and things passed on. I am atoning. My uncle was gay, and he was a brilliant. He was at Princeton, and he had a nervous breakdown and collapsed because he was gay, and my family tortured him. They absolutely drove him to madness. And at the end of his life, and when he was in an alcohol-induced dementia, I was his guardian. And I feel, both in my personal life and what I'm doing here, is that I'm atoning for the sins that my family inflicted on my uncle.
Wow. Wow.
That's
a heavy mantle to take on yourself.
Well, I'm doing this for myself. Yeah, I'm doing this for myself. I feel the pain that my uncle suffered at the hands of my family. And even my mother who loved him, she just didn't get it. And she didn't. And the other thing too is, we all have our road to freedom. We're all trying to fight our way down this road. Absolutely. But everyone's on the spectrum of that road. My road, as difficult, everyone's road is difficult to come out or whatever. It's always painful, and you hurt people you love, and yet you have to be yourself, and you find out who are your friends and family and who aren't, all that stuff. It's all painful stuff. But the people that the Rainbow Railroad are helping, they're on the absolute end of the spectrum of that.
They really are.
They're being killed. They're being tortured. They're having, electroshock put to their gonads. They're being waterboarded.
Fire to the camping and the block.
Put guns to their head. Right. These people, their road to freedom is through hell. And even as hard as it is, the difficulty that we've had should give us empathy to come and help these people at the far end of the spectrum of this road to freedom, who might never experience freedom. That's how desperate and bleak
they may die fighting for that freedom. But I think the biggest thing, the big takeaway from all of this, for me and for you, is communicating that it's not something that's over there. You use the word empathy. Right. What does that mean, right? I am my brother's keeper, all right? That it's happening to human beings that you can connect to. My aha moment was being at Stonewall and seeing those people on the live stream introducing themselves. They had nothing, and they're holding up these signs of who they want to be: a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer. All right, that connects to here. Right. These human beings, and I think the best thing any of us can do is find a way to make that connection happen. I love that you're bringing this festival to New York. This is a very important thing. The money is definitely here, but we do need to raise awareness and get the word out. Oh, and I'm in my countdown now. Juan, my producer, said we have 2 minutes left. Richard, these are your 2 minutes left. What do you want to tell everybody?
I just, please come to this festival. We got to make this a success, and we would love to have you. You can go to rainbowrailroad.com, and it's at Eventbrite. I wish there was a way we could type up.
We can. I'm going to put it in right now.
And we would love to have you. It's David Morton, the great Chicago restaurateur. He is donating the food and drink. It's going to be a very, very special New York literary evening. And we would love to have you. Please come, bring your posse, and come and say hi to me, and I'll introduce you. You need to meet some people too, and I'd be delighted to introduce you around, and tell me that you came from Triversity Talk.
Oh, yes.
And by the way, also, here's another really good book to read.
We're supposed to be talking about your books, not mine.
So anyway, you guys, and if you're listening, in Wendy's book, she talks about, which we all know, that overnight successes don't happen overnight.
That's exactly right.
They are years in the making. This evening on January 12th is years in the making. Please come and help me make it a success for the good of our brothers and sisters around the world who need our help. Thank you.
Exactly. I couldn't have put it any better myself. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for raising awareness.
Thank you for having me. Really.
This is the first time we're doing this, and it's in New York, and hopefully this will become a yearly thing. That's it. You got to build from the ground up. We call it a groundswell. That's exactly what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for listening.
And to our audience who's listening, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I am accessible. You can find me on Facebook and all social media. And we put a big banner up, Richard, with the internet information. Listen to me, the internet information. All right. I will see you January 12th, if not sooner. And thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.